Hello and welcome to this video on homeopathy. Homeopathy is a form of complementary therapy. These are sometimes erroneously described as complementary and alternative medicine. As Tim Minchin put it, we call alternative medicine that works medicine. Our addition to that would be that there has never been a need for qualifiers to medicine. Homeopathy originates with a 1796 German physician called Samuel Hahnemann. He created the fundamental basis for what homeopaths believe now. That is, that substances that cause the symptoms seen in a disease in healthy people will cause similar symptoms in sick people, and this will cure the disease. A doctrine called similia similibus curantur, or like cures like. It sounds very much like a New Age pseudoscience or cult-like mantra, and honestly, it is. All of this was established well before we understood germ theory, epidemiology, anesthesia, and more. Yet somehow, homeopaths believe their treatment from over 200 years ago, that was insufficient at the time for treating people, is now up to the same task as modern medicine. This is true even if they have taken to using Latin names for their products in use. There is a slight split in homeopathy regarding the founding principle. Some, instead of approaching themselves as doctors, view themselves as being more akin to lifestyle modification, things like diet, exercise, and mindfulness. There is little to no prescriptions of like-for-like cures, or any other prescriptions. These are, however, a fractional minority. The majority remain a sort of Puritan. They retain the original idea, but some take it a step further in their preparations. These are their treatments, which they're unable to use that name since they have no clinical evidence that they treat anything. Preparations are made using homeopathic dilutions. These dilutions will be important later on, but the idea behind it is that as you dilute a substance, and you keep doing so, the final product is chemically indistinguishable from the original, and is in fact more powerful. We'll get to that shortly. We're fortunate that homeopathy reached its peak popularity in the 19th century, and it found its way across the entire world. Schools were set up for it, there were many institutions, it basically had no competition, and so whilst other treatments could harm people, this was at least relatively inefficacious, and therefore did no harm, which was better than killing someone. Fortunately though, we found out about modern medicine. Medical schools were established, and we had actual medicine to treat people that did something good. Homeopathy couldn't really fight against that. Nowadays, with anti-vaxxers and other conspiracy theorists, cultists, and New Age charlatans, it has had a slight resurgence. Hopefully we'll have another period of enlightenment where people will realize what a terrible idea it is. Homeopathy does have limited similarities to modern medicine and pharmacology. At least, in theory, the original diluted sample relies on a small sample of an active ingredient. In other cases, it will deviate wildly from modern medicine by using preparations made from diseased or pathological products. These can include feces, urine, respiratory discharge, blood, and more. The latter system has not been used for a long time, as many treatments in modern medicine can be better made with other modern techniques. There's also another method called imponderables. These use an immaterial feature of the treatment. Let's start with preparations. These take something like leaves, parts of an animal, bark, rocks, and add these to a solvent of some sort, often an alcohol or water. This is then diluted in this, and this becomes the preparation. Then you have isopathy. Isopathy is the instance of where they take a disease of some kind, and they use that as the means of treating someone. This method was used in part in the very early days of inoculations. Specifically, cowpox was used to treat smallpox. It did, however, have a range of risks and dangers associated with it. After all, you're taking a zoonosis from another animal, introducing it into humans, and then hoping it works the way it works. We're fortunate that that did work very effectively. Doing so without regard for the environment and nature of what you're doing and without the specialized knowledge required is simply gambling with unnecessary risk. Finally, there are the imponderables. These aren't great philosophical questions, but instead, they are claims that either the alcohol or water, and in some rare cases lactose, have captured and held on the essence or spirit, or whatever it is that's intending to treat the disease. And different methods are claimed to work for this, ranging from X-rays and sunlight through to, who knows what. Somehow or other, the homeopath has imparted the treatment into this particular carrier, and that's now going to treat you. It's about as efficacious as prayer. There are also a few minority practices that we haven't touched on in detail, and although we won't explain them very much, they're worth being aware of. These include things like writing a prescription on a piece of paper and then pinning these to a patient, putting them under water, and then claiming the water has somehow received the treatment. There are a few others as well, and for the most part, these have even less to support them than what we've already mentioned, and what we've mentioned is barely able to be argued as anything. Going now to the dilutions, we mentioned that these were rather important, and there's a reason for that. They were the original method created by Hahnemann. It uses a log system of dilution. That's 1 part in 10 each time. The first time you dilute it, there's nothing particularly notable. For instance, here, we're adding 10 milliliters of red food dye, a small amount of fluorescent compound, and making it up to 100 milliliters with water. That's an approximately 1 in 10 dilution. From here, we take 10 milliliters of this and add it to 90 milliliters of water. This second dilution is now effectively a 1 in 100 dilution factor. From here, we repeat the process, and that creates a 1 in 1000, then a 1 in 10,000, and it will continue until we get to the end. This is known as a decimal dilution scale, and often marked with an X or a D. This is the more generous approach, let's say. The more common is known as the C scale, and that uses a factor of 100. That would be 1 milliliter of, say, red food dye in this case, into 99 milliliters of water. This has already hopefully created a notable issue for you. How much of the sample remains in the dilution after just a few steps? It's been calculated, and that's a worrying thing by itself, that you can do this with simple math. The most dilute solution likely to contain a single solitary molecule of the original substance is 12C. That is a rather worrying figure, and in fact it should be a red flag for just about everyone. It is generally understood that the less of something in solution, such as cordial, colouring, and in this case, a purported treatment, the less efficacious it is. By diluting the substance, you get less of what makes it work. This does not amplify the result, but greatly reduces it. The whole premise of homeopathic dilutions and preparations runs contrary to not only common sense, but logic. These treatments, if we are to be generous, often come with very non-specific effects, and arguably, if they were to work as well as they claim, they should have equally non-specific side effects, which for some reason are often not given. Rarely are any off-target effects noted. There are no side effects, and the effects of use are vague. No regulated medicine has such a vague body of knowledge around its use. Looking at it here, you can see just how quickly you go from having a very obvious presence of something, like food dye or the fluorescent compound, all the way down through to having nothing there obviously, and even when we use the amplified signal or the fluorescent dye, we can't find anything at the lower end of the spectrum that's not an effect of the glass. Of course, not every treatment available from a homeopath is a liquid or comes as a preparation in terms you might be familiar with. There are also pills, tablets, and capsule treatments. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on how you view it, these do not significantly improve on this situation. Many of these are made from water or sugar. Neither has much in the way of medicinal properties. What they do provide is the placebo effect. As already noted, anything with greater than 12C potency is likely to have no trace of the active ingredient whatsoever. Looking at one of the larger suppliers of homeopathic treatments, there's a larger tendency towards 30C or greater dilutions. There are fewer 8 or 9C dilutions. This means the vast section of their market, or at least what they're selling, is unlikely to have even a single molecule of the active ingredient in it. Homeopathy does have another bizarre theory and defense to all of this. It's known as water memory. It's a process by which water or other solvents retain a memory of what it has previously contained. This is generally by virtue of being shaken about or otherwise agitated. This being used as a defense of homeopathic dilutions sounds a lot like bullshit. In fact, it's a good question why water retains a memory of this, but not a memory of this. Sometimes some things are just a mystery. There is always a big argument made about big pharma, but what about big natural or big homeopath? Whatever term you want to use. A big pharma is made up from a conglomeration of many companies. They have a combined annual value of about $358 billion. Among more than 20 companies, some of which are private while others are heavily involved with governments. Admittedly, big homeopathy by comparison is worth approximately $16 billion, and therefore a significantly smaller market share. But that $16 billion is controlled by a smaller number of companies as well, 9 companies to be more accurate. The market control and diversity is very different. One has great public participation, the other is entirely private and profit-driven. Take a guess as to which is which. Neither party is exactly a model citizen of the world either way. Despite this, some actions are rather more egregious than others. Take for example Boyrun. They were threatening to sue an amateur blogger, and that was because they've made remarks somewhat similar to our video about homeopathy. And, well, that has yet to go anywhere particularly, but note that a $16 billion industry is bullying a single, effectively volunteer hobby blogger. The popularity, or at least resurging popularity, of homeopath seems to be a combination of factors. Cognitive bias, the personal nature of care given, and placebo effect. Homeopaths provide a much longer consultation to their client than a doctor can. Admittedly, they often charge a premium for that privilege, but they do give more attention. This provides a small improvement in mood, relaxation of the body, and general sense of better well-being. A short-lived and temporary effect, but one that is not available via conventional medicine. They effectively try to provide what they view as a personalized prescription and care regime. Again, something due to the nature of modern medicine isn't as readily available. Many doctors simply don't have the time and capacity to give every patient the attention they deserve. The experience people have from this and following sensation of improvement is associated in the human mind as being connected. This is part of the brain's tendency to detect patterns where none exist. The same reason we can see Jesus in a cheese sandwich. When the pattern deviates from their relief, the brain switches to the assumption that either the disease is coming back again, or the treatment's wearing off, and therefore they return to the homeopath, and the circle repeats again. Finally, there is the placebo effect. Being given something for a condition, no matter how fanciful, creative, or real, will help. This is because many treatments from a homeopath contain sugar or water. Placebos will to some extent help a patient improve their condition. Even believing someone is being treated will help that person feel as though they are better. Many experiments have demonstrated that this can relieve pain, reduce severity of symptoms, and more. Overall, homeopathy is a relic from the turn of the 18th century. At this time, they were still practicing bloodletting and leeching as the basic treatment for things like pain and discomfort. Things that we could now know were associated with cancer, heart disorders, neurological disorders, and more. And then homeopathy comes along on the premise that if we make this condition worse by exacerbating the circumstances, symptoms, and signs, somehow the person will get better. It's only fortunate that the treatments they used were so weak as to have no effect that they didn't cause more harm. It's almost unfortunate that they didn't cause more harm, otherwise the world would know just what a crackpot theory this is based on the swath of dead people that it had left behind. And hopefully, going into the future, people will realize exactly the same thing. The treatment they're receiving is nothing more than a placebo, a pat on the back, and a farewell to get better on your way out, old chap, by the person who's conned them out of their money. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.